So for me, it's all about human performance and how can we optimise that moment of flow, which is all about peak performance at work and in life. We can sometimes kind of set ourselves barriers, and it's all about overcoming them and setting ourselves up and supporting ourselves to be the best that we can be. So thank you so much to Michelle and Helen and everybody for inviting me to kind of come along and talk about all things performance, ultimately finding your flow. So it was great to listen in this morning to get the background behind kind of finance and also social media, because ultimately a lot of that is about setting the bedrock for your business, for your life, and ultimately how do you perform. And I'd just like you to kind of park maybe what you think of as performance. A lot of times in business we kind of have this performance, it's a link to appraisals, it's a link to things I must do, it's goal setting. And I'd just like you to maybe park that for now and open yourself up more to the art and science of performance as more of a philosophy to approach work and life. So what we're going to do over the next kind of 45 minutes or so is have a look at performance, how you can get more performance in your life, and how did I find it, and touch on this thing called flow. I will be sharing a few kind of stories, running stories, and I kind of get it that not everybody loves running. Little show of hands, who would classify themselves as a runner? Yeah, and I mean, as a runner, it's like literally, it's putting your trainers on, it's doing anything from that couch to 5K or park run. Running is so all-inclusive, and I do meet so many people and it's like, oh, I'm not really a runner. It's like, yes, you are a runner. It's getting that runner, that athlete mindset of how do you approach it and how can you embrace it. But I do get it. So if running's not your thing, please bear with me and think about what you love in work. So there will be a few happy snaps along the way. This was this time last year, and it's an event that's taking place at this moment. And I do have a little bit of a running endurance habit. So it's not just kind of going running, it's generally running in environments that are maybe a little bit challenging, like, the Sahara Desert. And it's not just going for maybe a run, it's running over several days. And then it's also maybe carrying everything you need for those several days. So I kind of get it. I'm getting a few looks in the audience going, you're bonkers. And I know, it's kind of extreme. It's kind of not quite normal. And it's a slippery slope. It didn't just kind of happen overnight. And that's where we'll kind of go along with the story. However, flow. This is not just going to be a one-sided conversation. I'm a coach. And as a coach, one of the things I love is questions. So underneath the seats, there are 5 questions that are hidden. So if you have a little rummage around, so hopefully there should be 5 questions on a bit of paper attached underneath the seat.
Okay, so question 1, let's get straight to the heart of the matter. What is flow?
Yeah, what is flow? Good question. Thank you for that. Excellent. So I'd just like you all to kind of take a moment, just have a little bit of a think, and think back to that time when you're doing something that you kind of really enjoy, you really love. Clearly for me it's running. Okay, so what were you thinking? What were you feeling? What were you maybe smelling? What were you doing? And just capture that, just enjoy, savor that moment. And then I'd like you just to turn to somebody next to you and just share your flow moment. Sorry to interrupt you. I love that noise. It's like the conversations going on. That's what it's all about. And just listening to kind of the voices and the energy as people are kind of fully absorbed in their flow moment. So what is flow? So flow is the synchronization of energy on a mental, physical, emotional, and energetic level. And during this state of a complete immersion in an activity, the body and mind work harmoniously and is associated to peak performance. You're in the zone. It's that perfect moment. Everything else slips away. Time kind of stands still and you're just in that perfect moment. And this picture, I just think kind of captures for me one of my perfect moments. This was taken up on the Cotswold Way during an event in 2015. I recently arrived back into the UK. I've had a little bit of a nomadic lifestyle, to be honest, having been in the military and then lived in Australia and the Middle East. So I'd arrived back in the UK having lived abroad for 8 years and was kind of getting to know the running scene. And if you are a runner, or you know someone who's a runner, a company that organised some amazing events is X Energy. Really accessible, trail, multi-day, and even if you've never run on a trail or never done multi-day, they are so friendly, really great value for money. And if you're not up to the entire thing, go and do a little bit, and then they'll put you on a minibus and take you to the end and feed you cake. So it's really, really great. This was, I was coming to the end of the first day. It was a 3-day event. I was coming to the finish line, and everything had just fallen into place. Sometimes with running and all anything, you can do all this training, and sometimes things outside of your control kind of go wrong, or something will break. But with this, the day had just gone smoothly. I'd maintained my nutrition, my energy levels were all right. I was in that zone, I was focused, and I knew at the end, there was some decent cake and a shower waiting for me. And then I could get up and do it all again the next day and the next day, which I kind of get for some people would probably feel a bit like hell. But for me, this is, life is simple. All I need to do is run. It's just, I find it really liberating, really freedom. So flow. So where does flow come from? And I'd like to introduce you to the grandfather of flow, a gentleman called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Clearly, when you see the name on the screen, it's a little bit. He is a Hungarian-American positive psychologist, and I'll just let you kind of absorb his words. And I'm sure you kind of recognise from your description, you kind of have a little bit of association. I get that. And that's when we can kind of come on to, he did a lot of research about this, and we'll touch on the timeline in the 70s. And he kind of came up with, okay, what are these flow characteristics? And he came up with 8 flow characteristics of when you're in that moment. Okay, so what is it like? And he did a lot of research, he spoke to a lot of people, and this is what kind of came out again and again, and he kind of captured it. And you may kind of think, okay, so where does the word flow come from? It's a little bit of a random word, let's be honest, for a psychologist definition. But when he was interviewing people in the 70s, and he went all around the world, he spoke to musicians, he spoke to Japanese bikers, he spoke to Korean farmers, literally musicians, the lot. And the word that came up again and again and again was flowy, flow. And he's like, oh, okay, it's going to have to be flow then, because that's what it is. You're in the flow, you're in that moment. So, flow characteristics, right. So, next question, please. Oh, we didn't have a 2. Damn, okay, so I now ask my question myself. Okay, so Anna-Marie, how did you find flow? Good question, thank you very much. So, flow, it's not something that you just kind of stumble across. I mean, you may have fleeting glimpses of it, and you're like, oh, that kind of felt right. Everything kind of slotted into place. Was it a bit of a miracle? How did it happen? How does it kind of link back to where I came from? How can I get more of it ultimately? And we're going to be touching on that in a minute, because clearly when you've experienced flow, you kind of want to get more of it in your life. So how did it start off for me? And sometimes, it's very easy when I'm stood up here, and yes, I do have a bit of a running habit. I've been lucky to compete all over the world and stood on podiums in various different countries. It's all very easy to see that person at that moment in time. And it actually, okay, so how did that happen? What is the backstory? Because often it's the backstory that we create about ourselves that can actually hold us back and can get in the way of our performance and can get in the way of flow. So for me, my backstory kind of sticks kicking off, and it can be, oh, well, it was very easy for Anna-Marie. She's natural, she's talented, it was all handed on a plate. Okay, so in reality, how did it actually kind of pan out? Yes, when I was a youngster, I had a slightly, maybe unusual upbringing. This is me, aged 2 months, and I was 6 weeks premature, near a glacier, next to a glacier in Norway, in a Fenix plastic bag. And if you come from Newcastle or know Newcastle, the northeast, Fenix, clearly department store there. So that was my introduction to the outdoors, which clearly links into why I love the outdoors so much. And you may have noticed on your seats, everyone got a postcard about being outside and moving and walking. It's a massive part of my life. And then my father, bless him, in his little running shorts and a vest, running. So clearly, was there a genetic kind of element, or was it something that I kind of fully embraced? I spent a lot of my childhood in the Lake District, in the car, in the rain, waiting for my dad to finish a race. So this is him on Jura, and we went up to Jura. It's an island in the Inner Hebrides, absolutely beautiful. There's a fell race there every year that we went to religiously for 18 years, so he could kind of run up and down mountains. So yes, there is an element of running within my history, though it's ultimately how do I respond to that? How do I react to it? We all have a choice in life. I could have kind of completely shunned it and gone the other way, or I could have embraced it. And there's been times throughout my life when I have been more active, and other times, which we'll see in a moment, when maybe less active. So we have the power to craft, to shape our life. Sometimes it can be a little bit, daunting, and we're in the life as we are, and we're in that present moment, and you can feel out of control. But actually, we all have a choice. What do you choose? So I get asked this question a lot about, oh, you must have been super sporty when you were at school and you must have loved sports. Not quite. So these are my esteemed PE teachers from my secondary school. Any teachers or ex-teachers, do apologise. But clearly I think, their report writing needed a little bit of maybe more encouragement. So Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Barnett, God bless them. And this is genuine. This was on my school report. And I look back now and I hated PE. I absolutely hated it. I used to schedule my PE lessons during sports, basically to avoid it. And I remember one day being given a letter by my form teacher, and I knew exactly what it said. It was the PE teacher complaining to my parents that I always scheduled my piano lessons during PE, and that my parents would stop me doing it. So I had this letter, and I couldn't get away with it because parents' evening was the week after, and I knew the sports teachers were going to ask whether they'd received it or not. So I kind of went home with this letter and had to give it to my parents. And my mother, thankfully, thought it was hilarious. And when you have this, how does this encourage? And it's something I get quite frustrated about now within the younger generation, and trying to encourage the younger generation, particularly young girls, to do sport. And how can we kind of get them to do it? Because often within school, it's very difficult to get the provision for it. So anyway, I had this kind of like bouncing around, rather timid, needs to develop my self-confidence. What a load of rubbish. But how can that label, how can that stick with somebody? So I think it's also a really important message to remember what words you use when you're communicating with people, and how people can take words on board and how they can adopt them as their identity. So if I'd read that and taken it on, where do you end up in the future? How do you carry it around with you? You build it up, you have this inner critic, and I could have gone on to do nothing. So, however, still a bit of outdoors, all outdoorsy, liked being outdoors. Then went on to the military. So I kind of left school, and you kind of, on the outset of it, you can think, went to university, went to the army, sailed through. Though behind the scenes, and it's often what you don't see, I had no idea where I wanted to go, or no purpose. All my friends, they wanted to be doctors, they wanted to be vets, they want to be or lawyers. That was the top three. And I was just like, I don't really know. Well, I'll join the army. It's kind of an escape. They do travel. They kind of go outside. I was sold the kind of outdoorsness. Though I didn't really have a purpose. I didn't really know where I was going. So this is where I kind of want to link to a time of, if you don't know where you're going, if you haven't got a purpose, how can you perform? How can you even set about finding that moment of flow? Because you just generally are a little bit lost. I know during this stage of my life in my 20s, I kind of felt, I didn't belong anywhere. I kind of had that kind of just lack of identity. And that kind of in a way was a bit of a baseline of, I kind of didn't really look after myself. I didn't train that much. I probably drank far too much. It's kind of a university, and in the army, it's kind of socially acceptable. Kind of few bottles of wine in the mess kind of thing. But at that time I knew that it wasn't really me. Where was I going? What was I doing? But within that period, it can be very easy to stay stuck in that period and think that there is no way out. Where do you go? What do you do? And if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. So it would have been very easy to stay trapped within that cycle, though it was harder to make a change. And sometimes it's so difficult to make that change, but any change, just do something different, you'll get a different outcome. So it's making that decision, it's making that choice, and then having the actions. So I knew that there was something more for me, and I couldn't just sit there. It wasn't going to come and hand me on a plate. I had to do something about it. and this links very much back to now, fast forward 10 years, if you told me then that I would be an ultra runner having achieved so much and I would have my own business, I'd have looked at you and gone, you're completely mad. There's no way I could do that. And this is almost as a coach, I'm kind of like making the admission, I didn't have this 10-year plan. I didn't have this 15-year plan. It was just, I knew at some point I had to kickstart a change. And it's amazing what opportunities arise when you open yourself up to the possibility of it. So this is when I became very interested in performance and human performance, and ultimately what are we all capable of? How can we achieve more? What can we do? What do we actually have to do to achieve more to get this peak performance? And I started kind of doing quite a bit of reading around the subject of performance. And when you start reading around performance and peak performance, ultimately at some point you stumble across flow and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, because that is where it all leads to. So kind of taking a step back in time, this idea of flow and performance very much links back to the 1900s, when there was a guy in Harvard, James Howard. He started looking at kind of consciousness and how does your brain change when you're performing. Fast forward to the 40s, you'll probably recognise Maslow's hierarchy of needs up there. And this is all very much linking into performance. Okay, so how can we perform? What do we need to perform at our best? And having that kind of bedrock. Clearly back in the 20s, I didn't even have that bedrock. There was nothing there. I wasn't looking after my basic needs of, eating and sleeping properly, let alone the psychological stuff. I wasn't going to be going up and getting any moment of flow in the slightest. And then fast forward to the 70s, that's when there was a lot of work within the positive psychology world by Mihai around flow, and he did his research. It's kind of gradually building up through the 20th century. I think it's time for another question. I've been speaking for too long. Clearly, as a coach, I kind of like my clients generally do the work, and I plop a little question in and then leave it open to silence. So who had question number 3?
Who's able to find more flow?
Well, the good news is that basically it's there for everybody to tap into. You've all kind of shared this flow moment, and it may have just been really fleeting. It might have only happened once in your life, but you can make that happen again. What you want to have, and what the research shows, is that you want to have this questing disposition for flow. And there's been research done by the CIPD, Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, that about 11% of the population have this quest for flow. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's break it down a little bit more. So what it is, it's you're likely, personality-wise, potentially, to have more of an autotelic personality. So that is more that you'll do stuff because you enjoy the experience of it, rather than just achieving the end state, the actual goal. And it means that you're more conscientious, you're determined, you've got this perseverance that you'll keep trying again and again and again and again, rather than just kind of going, it didn't work for me, and give up, potentially. So this is where it comes down to this skill and the challenge. Okay, so let's start getting specific. How do we kind of get this moment of flow? How do we balance it out? So it's all about getting that balance of the skill and the challenge. Okay, I just want to show you this graph, and it's easy to kind of find online, and you'll get the slides later. It's okay, so how do I balance the skill? How do I balance the challenge? And you notice on the axes we've got kind of the skill and the challenge. And how do you kind of vary them in whatever activity that you are doing? And it's kind of split up, and ultimately we want to be on that top right-hand corner where the moment of flow is. But you kind of recognize from the other words around the spiral that how can you tweak them? How can you change them? So if you're bored, okay, well actually if I'm bored, how do I increase the skill level and how do I increase the challenge? If I'm getting too relaxed, that's because I'm too kind of comfortable with what I'm doing. How can I present myself with a bigger challenge in whatever I do? Or actually, if I'm getting anxious, maybe the challenge where I've kind of set for myself, it's too big. How can I kind of pare it back so I can refine my skills and practice and then notch the challenge up? So it all is that balance of positioning yourself. So back to the history of flow and where it kind of came from. And we kind of stopped it in the 70s at the moment. And linking it back to the running, okay, so with this, how did it kind of come together? What actually happened? And a lot of people started surmising, oh, it's the runner's high. You know, you kind of go running and you get your endorphins and it's buzzing through your body. And that's kind of where it next stemmed from. And this was me in Turkey, in central Turkey, in a place called Cappadocia. Absolutely stunning, where I've been invited to take part of the Ultra Trail World Tour, which is a series of races that kind of work on a global basis. So yeah, enjoying a moment of flow as we go. So next question, please.
It all sounds a bit fluffy and intangible.
I know.
Scientific evidence to back it up.
Yeah, I know. But you kind of get that cynical side of it. Sometimes you're like, it all sounds all very nice, a little bit fluffy. Okay, where's the substance? Where's the evidence behind it? And that's what I kind of enjoy within my work. It's always that kind of questing disposition. It's always that learning, but actually where's the evidence? And this is where it comes to the brain. And this is what happened at the shift when we kind of entered into the 2000s. Actually, psychology and neuroscience kind of met, basically. And they started doing experiments on individuals and using a lot of MRI scanners. So they'd get, there was one done, for example, with a load of jazz musicians, and they kind of linked up to their brain and had them play all together and what was actually happening. And this is when they could start to kind of unpick the actual changes in the brain that actually then back up the feelings and the emotions that people are having. So what is happening at the front of our brain, which I'm sure we all kind of know about, is where we have our cognitive thought. And what was happening, what they were finding was there was this phenomenon called transient hypofrontality. You're kind of like, what is that? Transient? Okay, let's break it down. So basically, transient is kind of like temporary. Hypo is when it like slows down as opposed to hyper. And frontality was because it was the prefrontal cortex. So what was happening in moments of flow was ultimately a part of the brain was like shutting down. So all the time where, you know, maybe you're having your rational thought and your logical thinking and that critical inner nag, actually in a moment of flow, that's not happening. It's stopped, it's been deactivated. So that's when the rest of your brain can kind of start opening up and speaking to each other. And that's why you're often a lot more kind of creative and in the moment. And it's also the front of the brain, that's what keeps track of time. So if you're shutting that part of your brain off, then you don't have a sense of time ultimately. So that's how it all comes together. But that's just part of it. That's just one thing. That's just the frontal part. What also is happening is you're getting this kind of neurochemical cocktail of all these good kind of dopamine, serotonin, and adrenaline, which I'm sure you've all heard of, starts kind of rushing around your body and bathing your brain. And your brain, because the prefrontal cortex has been shut down, then becomes far more responsive to these chemicals. So it's heightening your senses. You feel a lot more alert, you're a lot more aware. So you've got kind of a double whammy. And it's not just a double whammy, it's actually a triple whammy. And the brain actually starts working differently as well. So your brain waves, when we're normally just going around normal life, we're in beta, so they're quite short brain waves. However, when you go into this moment of flow, your brain waves change and they go a lot more into alpha, which is when you're kind of maybe daydreaming and a little bit creative. And then theta, which is what you have during your REM sleep. So your brain is going from the beta, that kind of really active, into a far more kind of slow pace, creative space. So that's kind of like a triple whammy of what your brain is doing to get yourself into this flow. So that's the scientific evidence behind it from what's happening in the brain. Okay, so I think it's time for another question.
So how can I get more flow at work and across my life?
How can we access it in our work and life? And just before we answer that question, I'd just like you to have a little think and go, okay, so how could I use more flow in my life? Where would I use more flow in my life? Thank you very much for sharing where you'd like to get more flow, and just kind of bear that in mind, because that is your focus. And then we're going to work through, okay, so how can you get more flow in your life? And just a kind of couple of resources that I'd just kind of like to share, that if it's something that you'd want to kind of read up on and find out a little bit more. There's been a lot of work done by a couple of guys in the States, Jamie Wheeler and Stephen Kotler, and they do a lot of work in extreme sports, because often finding that flow moment it's pushing yourself, it's challenging yourself. So that's why a lot of the long research does come from kind of the extreme sports side of things, and they work quite a lot in association with the Red Bull. So there's a couple of books, Stealing Fire and The Rise of Superman. They are quite male kind of, and as you may have noticed that all the researchers that I've mentioned so far are all male. So that's why I find it interesting working with women and kind of what's their spin on performance and how do they access this and how do they access flow and are there any differences or not, kind of things. So that's within kind of the adventure sports world. And then it very much links into the business world as well. And there's been some research by McKinsey around flow. And they find that for people who are in that moment of flow, you're 5 times more productive in that zone. So actually being able to access that, and I find that figure 5, but wow, you know, if I can run 5 times better, and for me, I often, it's a refining, it's practicing how to access flow quicker and then for longer for when I'm running. And then it's not just with the running, you know, my work, I'm a performance coach. Okay, so when I'm coaching, when I'm working with a client, how can I be in flow with that client? How can I develop that connection so that it's just intuitive, it's natural, it's flowing? And I do a lot of my coaching outside, and I love to, you know, walk and talk with clients. And it's been within that kind of natural environment when you're potentially in pace with somebody, you're not kind of sat looking face to face, which can be kind of a little bit, I don't know, confrontation at times. And actually, but walking alongside, it's a lot more natural. It kind of frees people up and actually drawing inspiration from nature. Okay, so how can we together be at flow and have a conversation? So you're kind of getting right to the heart of what matters rather than kind of, I don't know, going around and round in circles on the surface at sometimes. It's getting to that crux and point. So this is, for me, it's all about finding performance, yes, within running. How can I get that moment? How can I achieve? You know, how can I be 5 times more effective than I normally am, but also within my business as well? And, you know, I've had conversations with my accountant, and I'm not a numbers person, but for her, very much, you know, she sets the conditions and it's sitting down and it's accessing that moment of flow with her spreadsheet. Personally, I couldn't think of anything worse, but I kind of get that for you, the running thing, you probably couldn't think of anything worse. It's how do you access that? So with that, I'd like to leapfrog into how to get more flow. And this work is being done by a bit of work by Jamie Wheeler and Stephen Kotler. And they've broken it down into 4 areas. And sometimes it's really nice to have a framework that you can then kind of take away and work through. So they have these 4 areas of flow triggers. And sometimes just having them and knowing them and focusing on them, actually, that is where your attention is in that moment. And a lot of the times when we're trying to maximize our performance, we distract ourselves. And it's about kind of thinking about other things. You know, I'll be going out and I've got a training session. I know I've got it in the schedule. I work with a coach. He sends me it through. And it's that piece by piece moment that then builds to produce the results. So it's going out, it's putting everything behind and focusing in that moment. So part of it comes down to the psychological. It's like, okay, how can I optimize the psychological side of things to improve my performance? How can I hold that focused attention? What goals do I have? And I know that we said before it's more about being in the moment than the actual goal, though it's having that within that moment. What is the goals? What do I want to achieve? How can I hold that? And then what feedback am I getting? So you're tuning into your body. You're not kind of just switching off and daydreaming. You're very much attuned to how do I feel? And, you know, a bit of a body scan. What's my breathing doing? And then it comes back to that challenge and skills ratio. Actually, am I too relaxed? Am I just kind of like plodding along? Do I need to up the challenge a little bit? And it's not easy. Not happy face. This was me last week on the Southwest Coastal Path training. I've got an event 2 weeks' time in Exmoor, Exmoor 50, so it's along the Southwest Coastal Path, and I do like to go out and recce wherever I'm going to be racing if I can, but ultimately that's like a bigger build-up to Oman that I'm doing at the end of November. And hands up, I'm a fair weather athlete. I hate the rain. Me and UK do not really get on very well. I lived in the Middle East for 4 years. I like the sun. So me dragging my arse out of bed and getting my trainers on, it is a challenge. It's not just, Anna Marie loves running. It's easy for her to train. It's like, UK, it's not. It's cold, it's wet, not happy face. But, you know, you got out and I did it. And I'm sure the same for you. There's something you kind of need to tackle it. And at the time, it may not feel great, but afterwards, And actually it's that ongoing, repeated practice, deliberate practice, that's what improves your performance moving forwards. So that's not happy face, that's happy face, very happy face. This for me was a massive, massive big, probably the biggest moment within the ultra running world. And I know that ultra running world is a niche, very much a niche. It's not like you open the paper and you kind of go, yeah, ultra running, the latest results are, you know, with football you'll open it up, cricket, motor racing, and even then it's generally male. So it is a bit frustrating. You know, I compete in a sport that no one really knows about, and I'm a woman, so no one really reports about that either. But hey, for me, this was a special moment that I kind of worked towards for probably 10 years, to be honest. I heard about this event, and it was one of those I automatically discounted. I will never be good enough to do that. And sometimes, you know, when you put that label on something, you can automatically just distract yourself. So this event, it's in France, Switzerland and Italy. It starts and finishes in a place called Chamonix, which I've been very lucky to call home for the last 18 years. As I've alluded to, being a bit of a nomad, being in the military where you move every 2 years, working in Australia, working in the Middle East, it's been Chamonix that has been like the stable base for me. And I'd heard about this event, which is basically 160 kilometers with 10,000 meters of ascent. And you have 45 hours to do it. And I'd seen people come and do it year in, year out, and I'd always gone, I could never do this. If you go and hike it, you normally take about 7 days. However, my descent into ultra running, it was gradual. You know, I did my first marathon back in 2004, which was the London, which is kind of a pretty standard entry point for a lot of people. And I kind of did it once with very limited training and, you know, did respectably well and thought, oh, next year I can go back and maybe if I do some training, I'll do a little bit better. And then once you do that, then it's like, well, there's other marathons out there. So then I went and did Edinburgh. And it's all on road. And for me, I love the mountains. I love being outdoors. I love the trails. So it was an automatic stepping point over into taking it away from the tarmac and the urban jungle. And I do have quite a lot of people who come to me who've done road running and want to make that transition. And sometimes making that transition to running on trail can be quite challenging if you've not been on the trail. It's different, and going out and getting lost and being on your own. It's kind of getting over that. So yes, this has been my mainstay. Applied. Luckily got a place, because actually getting a place in some of these events is getting harder and harder and harder. And you have to go through a ballot system, you have to get a number of points. And yeah, I spent a lot of time running up and down Pen y Fan and the Brecon Beacons. And then also because Wiltshire, yes, Wiltshire's hilly, but there's not many mountains, let's be honest. So the biggest mountain nearest me is Westbury White Horse, which is about 100 metres top to bottom. So generally on a Saturday night, you would find me with my head torch on, running up and down Westbury White Horse for 3 hours. And then the following day, on Sunday morning, I'll be back again for more, because it's that back-to-back training. That's where you build the strength and when you build the endurance. So there was one night that my husband came to the top of Westbury White Horse on his mountain bike to look for me, and he got kind of a group of people kind of found him, like, well, what are you doing up here in the middle of the night on a mountain bike with a head torch on? He's like, I'm looking for my wife. Okay, yeah. And I kind of get it. Saturday night, Westbury White Horse is probably not where you really want to be. But it's that behind the scenes. And I kind of get it, you know, social media, sometimes you kind of see the pictures and the finishing, and sometimes it's the behind the scenes hard work, which, you know, Facebook Live lesson to me, need to go on and interact a little bit more. So the talk this morning was super helpful, so thank you. So yeah, so with this race, and in ultra running, particularly with the UTWT, they celebrate the top 10 finishers, because that's just the way they kind of do, top 10 ladies, top 10 men. So I finished 7th, which was the highest female Brit in that time, and I think I was 5th Brit overall. And yeah, the smile, I think it just captures that moment. I'd done what I thought I never could. I performed, and believe me, there was a lot of flow going on at times. When you're racing for 28 and a half hours, it's a long time, and you kind of dip in and dip out of it. I wasn't exactly saying it was all plain sailing. There was times when I was just like, what am I doing? And it did rain a lot as well, and it was very muddy. So yeah, all worthwhile. So bringing it back to you and how can you access flow more, it's that psychological, it's those points. How can you work on them? How can you use them as a framework? But it's not just psychological, there are 3 more. we have got environmental. So it's what environment, what do you surround yourself to give yourself inspiration? And it's almost if you kind of do the same day in, day out, same bland kind of environment, what does that give you? What do you draw from that? And actually for me, it's having this awareness that, you know, I love being outdoors. I draw inspiration from nature. And it's actually within nature, what is that unpredictability? You don't kind of know what you're going to find out there when you go out for a walk, when you go out for a run, what you're going to see, and it's opening yourself up to that. So it's having that kind of novelty. It's a little bit unpredictable, it's kind of complex, and ultimately it's a little bit risky. If you always operate within your safe boundaries, it's that element of boredom. Actually, increase the challenge, increase the skills. How can you challenge yourself? So environmental, so yeah, deserts, novel, unpredictable, complex, risky. Yeah, so this is the Sahara Desert. This was the Marathon des Sables, which I think some people have heard of. So this is the 6 days, equivalent to 6 marathons in the Sahara Desert, carrying everything that you need to. So I went and did this for the first time in 2015. I'd been living in Saudi Arabia at the time, and actually for me it was a mental release. I'd gone from living on basically next to Bondi Beach, bikini, happy days, to then living in Riyadh, abaya. And for me mentally, I found that really quite challenging to cope with. So running for me was a release, it was an escape. And to have the Marathon des Sables as something to focus on, it helped me get through that kind of period of transition. So, and the Marathon des Sables again was a bit like the Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc. It was another race that I'd always wanted to do, and again thought I can never do that, not good enough, basically bracket. And then to have the opportunity to go and do it was amazing. So yeah, it does seem a bit of a crazy event, and you do get, it's about 1,300 people from all over the world flock to Morocco to take part in this every year. In 2015, I was the second lady and in the top 50. So for me, that was a real boost to my confidence, to be fair. That was like the first kind of international event that I did, and I was like, actually, I'm okay at this running business. Yeah, I can maybe call myself, you know, an elite athlete. And again, it comes back to that label. Are you a runner? Are you an athlete? How do you label, how do you take that category on yourself and own it? So that then gave me a lot of confidence to go on and do other events. And almost the reason I'm going to Oman is I actually had the balls to email the organizer and go, hey, I'm Anna Marie. I'm an elite athlete. I'm ranked in the top 10 of the Ultra Trail World Series. Your event looks amazing, first edition. I'd like to come and take part. And they emailed back and went, yes, here's a place, there you go. I was like, oh my God, I asked and I got it. And I just think that is a lesson, actually, sometimes having that confidence and courage to ask for something. What then happens? It's that opportunity, that door of opportunity. Sometimes it opens, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, what else is out there? So yeah, Marathon des Sables, desert habit, yeah. So again, it links, it's all about this environment, and for me, the environment, getting the environment like right, so it's a feel, it's an intuition, is a big part of it. And you know, I love taking clients outdoors, kind of getting my boots on, heading out and about, whether it's, you know, in Wiltshire or whether in London. It's about taking people outside of their office, outside of that, I don't know, often bland, you know, being in there all day, associations, kind of in work state, and taking that step outdoors. And you could link it very much to well-being. Actually, we are designed to move. It's the way our brain thinks optimally when we're moving, not when we're stuck for 10 hours a day behind a computer. And then there's a picture of the net walks that I organise with WAFA, and it's been lovely seeing some familiar faces who come along and support our monthly net walks. She's currently in Lebanon. That's why we've not got one this month, but we have got one next month, and I'll mention that at the end. But it's all about using that environment and bringing people together for conversations. So we've had psychological, we've had environmental, and the next one is social. And sometimes you can kind of think running, little bit antisocial, you're kind of on your own. And yes, I kind of get it's not a ball team sport altogether, though for me, actually it's been part of this kind of bigger running community that is so important. And I loved going and doing different events and meeting people and hearing their stories, and I get inspired by the people, and I inspire other people to go and do things, which it's this big kind of perpetuating, we're all kind of challenging each other. So these pictures, just looking at them, just bring back so many happy memories of, the Marathon des Sables. The first time I did it, these were my tent mates. So I basically lived, ate, breathed, slept in, you might see behind, it's called a tent, but believe me, it is not a Bedouin tent. It's basically a blanket that is held up by twigs. And the Sahara Desert is very windy. So it does not stay that shape for very long. And generally you're in your sleeping bag and it collapses on top of you. But I was sharing a tent with a friend who very sadly on the second day in fell, cut a knee, exploded, was not going to be able to continue, which was really sad. Though her friend Rose, who's the lady on the right-hand side, I then was left with them, and the guy next to me is a guy called Dave Healy. So he is completely blind. So he, it's crazy enough doing the Marathon des Sables as it is, but then going and doing it completely blind is like another level. And just living alongside him day in, day out was humbling. It really was. It makes you appreciate, what you can do and how we take things for granted a lot of the time. Then the other one was along the Jurassic Coast. So I do tend to race abroad, to be honest, though I do mix it up with a few events in the UK, when hopefully in the summer when it's not raining. So this was called the Wanna, which is basically the equivalent of 3 marathons along the Jurassic Coast, which is nice and hilly. And I'm basically around with this guy for, I think it was about 100k. So often, you kind of maybe running along, you'll come alongside someone, a few words. I don't tend to run with someone, for like 15 hours we ran together. And there's the stories that you share, you're kind of dipping out in and out and having conversations, and you're encouraging each other as well. And then, the little midget me in the middle of the boys, which was a 24-hour race up in Northumberland. And again, it's that support. And I'm sure everyone here, we're never the product of our own actions. It's always the support network that we have around us. And how, ultimately, what support do we sometimes need? And actually then how can we support others as well to support, our performance and everyone's performance collectively moving forwards. And then finally, my husband, bless him, who puts up with a lot. He is not an endurance. Well, I don't know, it depends what you think endurance is. For him, running is not kind of long distance wise. He's done 2 marathons in his life, and he supports me so much. But he very much sticks to more like half Ironman distance. He's an amazing swimmer, and half marathon, like the shorter, speedy stuff. But for him, kind of in the way, knowing that I've got that support framework behind me, and what he gives up to support me is amazing. And then, husband. So that was running around Gozo. So it's about having the social side of things. It's about communicating it. And it's about, I think the last one, saying yes more. I kind of did an experiment on myself last year, and you might have heard of the Say Yes More tribe. And if not, kind of check it out online. They do some amazing work. And actually, sometimes when we get asked things, what's your reaction? Is it a negative or is it a positive? And I was finding with myself, I kind of default setting was to say no. And I was like, right, okay, let's stop that. Let's say yes more. And then again, it's amazing what kind of opens up and what opportunities you can kind of take hold of. So, and then finally, so we have psychological, environmental, social, and then creative. And it's accessing this kind of creative space and being creative. Okay, so within your world, what do you notice? And then pushing the boundaries a bit as well. So it's having that creative mindset and opening yourself up to possibility. So those are the 4 flow triggers with the 17 kind of subsections. Draw from them, use them, think about them, hold them in your mind. So just a final question from me to you. Having sat here and listened and kind of discovered a little bit about ultra running and a bit more about flow and performance, just pulling it all together. You identified just before about where you'd like more flow within your life. Okay, so what can you do about it? What are you going to take away moving forwards?